Yeah, good evening, and I think it's a very hard time to still withstand the presentations, three more presentations. I am presenting this presentation, a scientific assessment of traditional knowledge on firewood values in Sikkim from almost 20 years back research work that I did as part of my research work. The rationale being, I was assigned to look at the impact of tourism on biodiversity, and one of the element of impact or drivers of the forest change was fuel extraction. So then I realized that it is first important to know why fuel are used and in what way it is used. So it is part of my thesis, though I was a zoology registered student. So what I'd like to do is take you through this aspect of rationalizing my study based on the present context, which is very much relevant as it was in 20 years back. Talk about very briefly about these study areas, the research framework and methodology, and the results, and also implications on what we are doing at present from ICIMOD. I think we all know, and it has been already reiterated this morning, that more than 70%, or more precisely more than 75% of our Himalayan rural areas still use wood as the source of energy. And what is more alarming to us is by 2030, the world population is going to be 9 billion compared to the present context of 6.5 billion. So there are estimations that we need 30% more land for agriculture to feed these 9 billion people in 2013. That means the rate of deforestation is already alarming and is going to be worse if we have to deal with this situation. Then are we prepared to at least maintain the existing forest resources? So that's the challenge that we have faced, and that's why I dealt with this subject to bring awareness that we need to relook in the way we practice our resources use pattern. Sikkim was introduced yesterday by our colleague, and it's one of the states in Indian Republic. And I have taken two study areas. One is Sikkim. In Sikkim, there's a place called Yuksam. So Yuksam used to be the first capital of kingdom of Sikkim, and it's also one of the important trekking corridor from where one can go to the base camp of Kanchenjunga, the third highest mountain, which is in the temperate region. And another is a Mamlay watershed in East Sikkim, which is more of a tropical situation. And these two study areas were chosen because GBPAN Institute, where I was associated, had the project at these two places. Just to rationalize that, there is the tradition that people used to prefer some species for firewood. And that preference guided them to go for that particular species, and they used to cut those species or bring those species and use as a fuel wood. Then I realized that why not to check how they prefer this species, what are the criteria that they are using those species preference, and relate that with the chemical analysis or the scientific kind of analysis. So we use this framework of trying to understand the local preference based on the pairwise ranking tools used by participatory rural appraisal tools, and also chemical analysis where we try to go for this fuel wood value index established by Professor Purohit from Uttaranchal. And here the energy value, density, ash content, and moisture content were considered to have the fuel wood value index. The higher the value, the better is the species. Then based on these two categories of the results, then we use this Pearson correlation to understand what the relations are between these two preferences. Just to deal with this methodology, as I have already mentioned, that there was a checklist of firewood used by the people were established. pairwise ranking was done. Then the scoring of the species were done in the community level. And at the laboratory, samples were brought in, then the ash content, moisture content, as well as the calorific value were estimated. And ultimately, the fuel value index was generated, and then the relation was established through Pearson correlation. So I don't want to go into this detail, but obviously we had this the energy value, the moisture content, density, and important this fuel value index were done for most of the species that are used in that villages, 2 villages. And ultimately, we tried to look at the relationship. And in Yuksam, we found that most of the element that are used for fuel value index were very much significantly correlated with the people's preference. And high value species were all indigenous and local. So whenever we try to estimate the fuel value index, then those species which are preferred are also local and indigenous, and those are the species people are preferring to use. And variation occurs with the convincing explanation or reasoning. For instance, there are some species which are high in fuel value index, but because of the meshy and the more fibrous structure, communities were not preferring to use that. So another area, the Mamlay watershed, which is at the tropical level, is also having similar kind of analysis. And here we try to go for another step of Pearson correlation, which is a stepwise correlation, because the first step was not significant. Then we try to ignore some of the dependent variables, and then we came to a conclusion that in chemical properties there is variation between temperate and tropical, and also based on the climatic variables such as rainfall and temperature and moisture content. The high density, and in tropical area, more precisely it came to be like the high density and low ash content is the criteria that people are using for good fuel species. So now the implications we have at present is, there is a preference of species. It has been there for centuries, and there is a selective cutting of these species, but based on the availability of species, they have gone to low quality of fuel extraction, because the high qualities are already not there or are very scarce. So because of these low quality species, more wood are needed because the calorific value is less, and more ash contents are there, so it's heavier also because of the higher moisture content. So more woods are cut in a very generic term. So because of that, in the recent time when we started working in this conservation landscape, which is a landscape shared by Eastern Nepal, Bhutan, and India, so we try to relate the fragmentation of forest. And surprisingly, many of this, the area are having or facing fragmentation of forests already. And we are not very sure, but it could be because of the high quality energy resources are depleting, so they have to depend on low quality and more extractions are happening. So the future implications is, as we have already mentioned, that the erosion of traditional knowledge are there, and is worsening. The situation is worsening. Surprisingly, we have started to go for this fast-growing, commercially demand pricing species, which are practiced as a monoculture, and the Cryptomeria japonica and Darjeeling is one example. Forest degradation and land cover change. If you relate this with the ongoing drivers of change, the 5 most important drivers of change, then this land use change is one of the most important drivers of change that is happening even in the Himalayas. So that is also bringing challenges to us, ultimately linking to biodiversity loss and also the ecosystem services provided by the Himalayas. And what is important for us is now, we are terming this as Anthropocene, new era of our situation where the human are dominant. If the human are dominant, then we also need to think about another 200, 300 millions of species which are also part of this system, and let them also thrive and live. So these are the publications that is already published in 2001, 2007, and 2009. If you need any reference, then this can be referred. Thank you very much for your attention.